All right, it is 4 p.m. At time we provide our update on our battle against COVID-19 each and every day. Today, I'm representing the Kaywood Commons. This is a school in the Kenton County School District. I know they are working to get back safely to the classroom. We're going to jump right in to the report today, go pretty quickly, open it up for questions. Today, we are reporting 745 new cases of COVID-19. 107 of those are kids 18 and under. Again, it seems like we are seeing a larger and larger and larger portion of positive cases being our young people. It brings our total number of cases to 64,158. Number of tests, we're now over 1.3 million, 1,301,407. Currently have 543 Kentuckians hospitalized, 122 in the ICU, 71 on a ventilator. New cases by county, 124 in Jefferson, 86 in Fayette, 58 in Christian, 39 in Warren, 28 in Barron, 23 in Franklin, 23 in Laurel, 18 in Hardin, 16 in Madison, 11 in Bullitt, 11 in Kenton, 10 in Davis, Pulaski, and Woodford. The rest are on the website. Toughest part of today's report, 13 new deaths. These are 13 individuals whose families will be mourning them. It's a hard number for any given day, 13 individuals. And not on here is a friend of mine from Northern Kentucky that I just learned about an hour and a half ago had passed away after a multi-month battle with COVID-19. So remember, this virus is very, very real, and it's still out there. So let's make sure that we light our homes up green, we ring those bells at 10 a.m., and that we try to reach out to these families that may be needing help, or other families that, while they might not have had somebody pass away, may be suffering from food insecurity. You may be worried about a child in that household. There may be a domestic violence situation. Let's make sure that we are thinking about what we can do for others who need our help at all times during this virus. This is a time that takes more compassion than any in my lifetime, and that's with every challenge we face right now. So let's remember that we've got to listen to each other, and we've got to help each other. The 13 today include a 97-year-old woman from Jefferson, a 69-year-old man from Warren, a 96-year-old woman from Fayette, an 82-year-old male from Perry, an 87-year-old man from Warren, an 88-year-old man from Warren, an 84-year-old woman from Warren, a 62-year-old woman from Warren, a 97-year-old woman from Bell, a 94-year-old woman from Warren, an 89-year-old woman from Warren, an 86-year-old woman from Christian, and a 90-year-old woman from Jefferson County. A couple of the areas, that brings our total death count to 1,137. And every day that we have a lot of cases, 745 today, we know that they're going to result in a lot of deaths. Thankfully, our mortality rate continues to creep down, but still, the higher the volume of the cases, the more Kentuckians we lose. So let's make sure we wear that mask, we socially distance, we cut our contacts down, we do what it takes. A couple of the areas that we regularly track: long-term care facilities, 40 new residents, 37 new staff, 14 new deaths attributable, but if we look at this now, that's just barely over 50% of the total deaths that we've reported. 3 new Kentucky facilities. K through 12 schools, a big jump here. As you all know, I think we have close to 7 high school football teams that are under quarantine, multiple other sports. We are seeing a significant number of cases, some that we wouldn't have known about but for a different injury. 166 new students, 59 new faculty or staff, 177 new schools. You can get our full report online. Remember, it is behind the news that you would get. And coming up on Monday is when every school has to report to that dashboard. That will go live on that Monday, with each school having to update that every day. So people should be able to get, not in real time, but every day, an update of what the situation is in their school and in surrounding schools. And in colleges and universities, 33 new students, 0 new faculty or staff, 8 new colleges or universities with at least 1 positive case. Before we open it up for questions, I want to mention the 2 LMPD officers last night that were shot. They are LMPD Major Aubrey Gregory. He has been released from the hospital. I got a chance to talk to him personally last night. He was surrounded by family and friends. He's going to have a full recovery, at least to my knowledge. The other is Officer Robin, and I think it's Disroches, and I apologize to him if I mispronounced his last name. He is stable and recovering. I talked to his mom last night during a period where they were still working to ensure his stability. I want to condemn this act of violence in the most stark terms. It is absolutely wrong. And the answer to violence can never be violence. And we want to make sure that these individuals that were out there last night and will be out there again tonight are safe. And we need to ensure that any type of activity or demonstrations remain nonviolent and remain peaceful. And we have to understand just one person can mar something that otherwise is done the right way, and that means we need to make sure those around us are also doing things the right way. All right, with that, we'll open it up to questions. I started over here yesterday. I think, Shelby, we'll start with you.
President Trump tweeted and said that he spoke with you. Can you give us some insights on your conversation with him?
Right. So last night, after I learned of the injuries to our 2 law enforcement officers, I returned to the Capitol, where I was here for several hours, ensuring that they were okay, that we had the situation under control. Talked to the mayor, talked to the chief of police, talked to one of the individuals that had been shot, and then the family members of the other. Also talked to the President of the United States, who initiated the call. His comments were that it appeared that we had things under control. He did make an offer if at a later point we needed additional assistance, he would provide it, but he stated, and I agreed, that at this time we have appropriate levels of law enforcement or peacekeepers there, and that if necessary we have the ability on the state level to increase that level of support. It was a good call. I appreciate him making it. Mike.
How are you preparing for tonight? What is the level of National Guard troops that are available in Louisville?
The question is, how are we preparing for tonight? What's the number of National Guard troops in Louisville? We're not going to disclose the number. That's part of the operational security of those individuals. We will, again, be conducting limited missions that are there for public safety and to protect critical infrastructure like our hospitals. We will adjust accordingly to ensure our people are safe and we can keep other people safe. I want to say again that presence is in no way intended to stifle people's First Amendment rights to give voice to any anger, frustration, but it is there to both keep people safe and ensure things like our hospitals can continue to operate when last night they were absolutely needed for these 2 officers and for those that might be suffering from COVID or other injuries. It's important that those that do want to give voice and do want to do that outside in Louisville do so before the curfew. And I would ask everyone to respect that curfew. The curfew is being applied to anyone that is out. I know that it was applied last night to one of the militia groups that showed up as well. And remember that those and other groups are also in the city. And I'm not sure it's them, but there are always individuals that might want to turn something that is peaceful into something that's not, that may dislike everybody, including law enforcement and demonstrators. And we got to make sure that we don't allow that to happen. And that does take a sufficient presence, which will be out tonight. Joe.
The state has recently loosened some restrictions on visitations for long-term care homes. Is there any discussion about loosening in-person visitations for state inmates?
The question is, given that we have loosened restriction on visitation for long-term care facilities, is there discussion on loosening it for inmates? There is discussion. It hasn't moved beyond any of those stages yet, so we don't have any step to announce. Nor should it suggest that we're going to have a step to announce, but it is being discussed, understanding that people very much, especially in that situation, rely on those personal interactions. Tom?
Governor, given again the indictment yesterday, does this give you any more impetus to equip the KSP with body cameras?
The question is, given the indictments yesterday, is it any more impetus for KSP and body cameras? I mean, that's a question we absolutely have to address as we see more and more law enforcement out there wearing them. We've got to talk with the Kentucky State Police about it. I believe that body cameras can protect an officer, or in this case it would be a trooper, as much as anything else. I can tell you, aside from some of these tragic situations where body camera footage is needed just to know what happened, in many instances there can be complaints against an officer or a trooper that if you have the body camera footage, you can dismiss them pretty quickly. Remember, these sometimes are heated exchanges, and sometimes having the video with that officer being professional, which is almost always the case, can be very helpful. The other thing that it can be is a tool whereby supervisors can ensure that people are following the training that they've had. I remember being in Washington, D.C. for a National Attorney General's Association meeting, and the then chief of the D.C. Police, she talked about how she would take that footage home and watch it and see that there were instances. She talked about one domestic violence situation where one of the officers turned their back. Now, that wasn't anything between the individuals, but could have compromised their safety, and so it was a check on different ways that she thought that she could use to improve the department. I am for body cameras where appropriate. There are some instances where I don't think that they would be, based on the particular mission of that individual unit.
I want to ask about some comments you made on MSNBC earlier today in regards to your request for the Attorney General to publish more information about the Breonna Taylor investigation online. You said the release of those details wouldn't impact the federal civil rights investigation. How is that possible to not impact that investigation by making some of those details public?
So today, the question is on one of the cable news shows. I talked about how I believe that the Attorney General can release the information from his criminal investigation without impacting the federal civil rights investigation. I believe that there are very different investigations that are that set out to determine very different things. I don't think a ballistics report, for instance, is going to have an impact on a civil rights investigation. And if they believe that it does, I think that the federal prosecutors can come forward and explain the specifics of that. But at this point, with the Attorney General saying he is not pursuing certain things, then I believe it makes it appropriate to provide the facts, the information, and the evidence. And it's about trusting the people of Kentucky. I trust them, that if they have all the facts, the evidence, and maybe some explanation if needed, that they can process it. And I know the Attorney General talks about the truth, and I talk about the truth. I think we ought to let the people of Kentucky see all of that, evaluate, and come to the truth. I believe that it is fully appropriate to do at this point in time. I've been a prosecutor. I withheld judgment on that until we've reached this stage, but at this point, put it all online. Put everything that would not impact, now there has been one indictment with 3 charges in it, put everything online that wouldn't impact that, and that's really about apparently shooting into a different apartment building, and let people see it. And it's been done in other places. It was done several months later in Ferguson. It's been done by other prosecutors. It's an attempt to be transparent, and I've seen firsthand that when you are willing to be transparent with the people of Kentucky, they will look at the information, they will try to understand the decisions you've made. They may disagree, but at least it's not a vacuum where different emotions or theories or others can come into play. I'm sorry we made you wait. Is it John?
Yes.
Okay, welcome.
I had a question for you about coronavirus. Cases are higher now than earlier in the pandemic when we had more severe restrictions. But over the past 2 months, those restrictions have been rolled back a little bit. So I'm just curious to know, what would it take for you to implement new restrictions for the things like public gatherings and things that you had earlier in the pandemic?
So the question is, with us now being at a higher level of total cases than we were earlier, but obviously we've gotten better at treating when we look at it. We've also follow our hospital data. And right now I would say we are at a place where we can handle more cases than previously. We're also testing more to find more people who have it, and that's a good thing. But you are right in that with loosening restrictions, it means people have more contacts and we will see the virus spread more. What it would take for me to implement new restrictions would be what we saw when we had to cut restaurants for a period of time and bars, and that is a proof of or indications of a real escalation, and not something that might be kind of up and down, or remember our plateaus aren't entirely flat, and not something just very gradual where it'll take a couple weeks to see. But if we started seeing what looked like an escalation, especially one that looks like it could turn into a severe escalation like we saw in Florida and Arizona, once you start seeing that curve, that's when we would take additional action. That's when the White House would ask us to take additional action. And they're keeping track like we are. We use somewhat different data, but we're in about the same place right now in that mainly what we need people to do is be a little bit better. More people wearing the mask in the White House, again, says we not only should have a mask mandate, but I should be encouraging it every day. Engaging in that social distancing. And remember, moderation, and not moderation like we had before March, but moderation in on the same day if you're going to work and going to the gym and going to dinner, that's just too many contacts. We got to spread them out and make sure that those gatherings, which we still have that 10-person limit, we keep at that level. We do see a lot of spread in those. It's not necessarily backyard barbecue, but it's house parties, and as it gets colder and people drive inside, that's going to be more important than ever. Shelby?
Governor, so many parents are at home helping their children with virtual school, but history is unfolding outside. How can they explain what is happening to their children?
The question is, with so many kids at home, but history going on outside, how do they explain what's happening to their children? First, I was worried I was going to be a little late because I was dealing with 6th grade geometry with my son, Will. Being governor doesn't stop your obligations, not your duty as a parent. Boy, we certainly appreciate our teachers when we're asked to step up and take a bigger role. I think that parents need to be able to have age-appropriate conversations with their children, and that they ought to be based in values about the type of world that we think we should have, about true dignity for all people, about the fact that I believe that God calls on us to build a world that is free of inequities and oppression and racism. And then need to be able to talk to their kids about our country's history and the fact that we have had to make changes and take strides at many points in our history, and right now that we're being called on to do more. It's a conversation with what's going on there, and also with what's going on in COVID-19 that's going to shape so much. But I'd like to think that every challenge gives us an opportunity to build a better day and maybe to raise better people. Part of that calls on us to recognize what we're living through, both the pandemic and calls for a more equitable society, and then to make sure we're instilling the right values in our kids. And I just remind people, because I have to remind myself, that our kids are always listening. And my kids are always hiding behind the door listening to everything. And so we got to really make sure in our heart and in our mind, we're not just saying the right things, but we believe them. And if we start feeling ways that we think, wait a minute, I shouldn't. I mean, that's a time that we're called on to be a little better. And so much of what we see, because we are inside, is on Facebook and Twitter, which, I mean, it's turned into poison in so many ways. Let's remember that if we're writing something down that contains hate or anger or making enemies out of one another, our kids are going to read that one day too. And maybe if we write it, we ought to look at it. We ought to realize that we need to change too and be a little better. And maybe we just need to turn it off entirely. All right, what do I think about including or not including university cases and considering community spread? I believe a university is a part of a community. Those kids go to restaurants, they go to bars, they go to different places in the community. Now, there is a challenge here, and it's one that we've got to discuss, and it especially impacts where I went to school, Fayette County Public Schools. Right now, UK has so many cases that it may push Fayette County red, and if UK stays open and continues to have those amount of cases, it could potentially keep it red. And then you've got Fayette County Public Schools that's saying, wait, we need a community spread that is low enough to where our kids can go to school. That is a real issue. I talked to the superintendent about it the other day, and we're continuing to have discussions. I talked to Mayor Gordon about it as well, and the answer can't be that university cases just don't count, because they are in the community. But the question is how we can make sure we're taking the right steps so K through 12 students don't miss out on opportunities because of other decisions. But this also makes us rise up, elevate our thinking that it's more than just the institution or institutions we serve. It's the communities around us that can be impacted.
Supreme Court's ruling that historical horse racing gambling devices are essentially no different than slot machines and illegal.
The Supreme Court today ruled that certain types of instant racing games are not parimutuel, and therefore I believe that they were unlawful. I will tell you that I believe that decision, while not criticizing the legal aspects of it, not having analyzed it, is devastating for so many Kentucky jobs, for the horse industry, and for the budget, and the state budget, which it adds about $21 million to every year, and that's growing. So I've already begun discussions with various partners about finding a path forward. We've now had this in the Commonwealth for several years. We have not seen the ills that people claim would come from it, coming from it. There is widespread gaming, much more than this, over just about every single one of our borders right now. If it's going to take a legislative change, we need to make the legislative change to keep our horse industry competitive, but to keep our Commonwealth competitive. Listen, we need a lot more types of gaming to compete with those around us. I mean, Indiana, using our money to build their roads, and other states around us, Missouri, they can pay for their health care costs. And in this period of COVID-19, revenue from those sources, for the most part, hasn't gone down, or not nearly as much once things reopened. And so we're going to find ourselves at not being competitive in what is otherwise a free market that's out there. And so I hope that, that we will get the necessary changes to move forward. And when we make them, I hope that maybe we can make a lot more.
Jesse Jackson just called for athletes to boycott the University of Kentucky and the University of Louisville and other economic boycotts in Louisville over the grand jury not indicting anyone in Breonna Taylor's death. Do you want to respond to that? I'm
told that Jesse Jackson has asked athletes to boycott UK, U of L, or because of the grand jury decision. I respect Reverend Jackson, but they didn't have any control, UK or U of L, over what those grand juries, what the grand jury did. I believe that they are trying through programs and efforts to build a better world. And so while I very much respect Reverend Jackson, I don't agree with a boycott of those that have had no control over this. Now, what I do think we ought to do is see all the information. I think the Attorney General can post it online. If there is some that needs to be held back because of the one indictment, then that's a discussion and an explanation he can provide, but it's time to give the information. And I think that if he did, this call for a boycott wouldn't have happened yet, because I think everybody would be sitting down and would be trying to process the true facts and evidence that's out there. And I think everybody benefits from the truth.
Governor Holcomb in Indiana has issued an order that beginning Saturday, all restaurants and bars can fully open in Indiana. Do you have anything that's in the works for our bars and restaurants here in Kentucky?
So I haven't seen. It's apparently an order from Holcomb further opening bars and restaurants. That's something I'll have to talk to him about. With us just about to start opening schools, we've got to get that done first before we consider any other capacities. Let's see, this is wanting a response to this. Quote about AG releasing more info. We appreciate Governor Beshear's team providing assistance to our office in the Commonwealth over the last few days in preparation for yesterday's announcement. However, releasing that information would compromise the federal investigation and violate a prosecutor's ethical duties. So we did work well with the Attorney General's office in communication leading up to it. I don't have an argument there. I've tried not to criticize the other parts, having not seen the file myself, but I've been a prosecutor, and I've been in that role. And if you are no longer pursuing those charges, there is not a duty, there is not a jury that you could compromise. There is no criminal investigation there that you can compromise, and so I do not think there can be a violation of those duties. I'm not the only one. In my office, I have the former Deputy Attorney General and a former district judge, and he agrees too. I don't agree with that view. Other prosecutors have done it. Let's just put it out there and let people see it.
Do you feel like the 9 o'clock curfew is actually effective at minimizing the tension in Louisville in regards to the protests that are happening out there?
Question is on the 9 p.m. Curfew in Louisville. I think it's necessary. I know a lot of people may not like it, but as we see the nights go further along, there is just more of an opportunity for those that would want to incite violence or take advantage of an opportunity, and I believe that it's necessary. But remember, it applies to everybody. And so, for instance, these groups that claim that they are keeping the peace, that are heavily armored, walking around Louisville with what I understand is no tactical training at all and no specific mission, it makes them go home too. And from somebody that has dealt with them firsthand, I think them going home is a really good idea. I just don't think that they ought to show up in Louisville in the first place.
You mentioned schools just now, and I wanted to ask, are we still on track to have the successful reopening that you're envisioning, and are there any trends that could put that at risk that you guys have spotted?
If we do have the incident map for today, James, if we don't, that's okay. Every day we update our incident rate map on kycovid19.ky.gov. What that shows is we have many counties that are in the yellow or the green that are, we think, in a good position to start some in-person class activities. We have others in the orange that need to be careful. And small groups would be best, a hybrid model after that. And then we have those in the red that I do not think should be starting in-person class. And if they are in-person class, they ought to move to virtual until they can move out of the red. I believe that in many places there can be a successful reopening, but what a successful reopening is in COVID doesn't look like what it did before. It's our kids in masks all day long because that's going to be required to lessen the spread. It's going to be fewer kids in a classroom. It may be them not being there as many hours of the day, but it is more direct interaction with their teachers, which we know is important. But the other thing is we got to be fluid and we got to be flexible. We have seen, as we've been here, that there are counties that will have very few cases and then boom, 60, 90, 100 in just a couple days or over a week. And so we got to understand that you could even be in the green or in the yellow, and by this time next week you could be in the red, and you got to be prepared to move from that in-person back to NTI and then come back again. The two things we got to continue to defeat this virus is to be strong, to have the endurance to do this as long as it takes, but number two, to be flexible and knowing the conditions on the ground in your county and your area can change really quickly, and so we've got to be able to change our approach. I'll do one more set if you all have them. Let's see. Did I respond to the President's offer for federal assistance to respond to the protests? The President and I agreed that right now we had sufficient assets and that didn't need that help. And again, it was a positive conversation about what was already in place.
Last week, nursing homes were given federal guidelines saying they could resume indoor visits, and now if they're in a red zone, that county's in a red zone, how does that affect them? Who do they follow, the state or the federal?
So on nursing home visits, or long-term care facilities, they have to follow the state guidelines that have been put out there. We think that they are very reasonable, following the incident rate map as well, and I think it also allows our communities to know how safe or unsafe it could be. Just because someone tells you you can do something, sometimes you shouldn't do something, and this also gives more information to family members. I know so many Kentuckians that will choose not to go see somebody in person at different times because they love them, and it's a hard thing to grasp, that you wouldn't see somebody in person because you love them, but you don't want to have even that potential of exposing them, depending on what you do. And you might want to think about it depending on your regular day and how many people you come into contact with. If you've got a job that has significant contact with other people, again, you might want to be more careful. By the way, I just remembered our 62-year-old woman from Warren that died today. That's on today's list. That's Dr. Shadowin, who we talked about before. That's gone through the committee and is now on here. That was one of the heads of infectious disease in Bowling Green. Wonderful person. Was fighting this virus with everything she had. Let's remember that her wish, her last interview, was that we all wear masks.
Two Daily Caller reporters were arrested last night while they were doing their duties as press members covering the protests. I believe they were held overnight. The publisher Daily Caller in the lawsuit against LMPD. Have you been briefed on the situation, and do you know if these charges will be dismissed?
The question is on two journalists that were arrested and held overnight. I've not been briefed on the situation at all about any of the activities that may have led to it and will need to be.
Can you ensure that going forward, journalists will be removed from the curfew and can cover the protests that are happening after
Well, certainly, I believe that, that the exception that applies to journalists for the curfew, that we need to make sure that not only are journalists able to cover things, but also that you're safe when you're out there. Listen, our journalists are our Kentucky citizens and friends and brother and sisters too. We may not always agree, but everybody's personal safety is my and the city's obligation and duty. Yeah.
Louisville expect the National Guard to be deployed in the city?
The question is, how long should the citizens of Louisville expect the National Guard to be there? You know, that's something that we look at on a day-to-day basis. Today will just be the second day that the Guard has been deployed there, and you know, as we head towards the weekend, we'll see what the situation is like on the ground. Remember that I did not call out the National Guard until the day the decision was coming down, so we weren't rash in our timing, and I don't want to keep them there any longer than is absolutely necessary. But at the same time, we want to make sure that everybody's safe. And we saw last night good reasons for ensuring that we have the right type of peace officers there. And we saw going back when we had the Angry Viking, I guess, and group come into town, a situation that could have escalated too, needing to make sure that we're protecting everybody, and I will say that last night also showed us the importance of having security we're providing at hospitals that need to be open and operating for not only the officers that were hurt last night, not only for COVID patients, but I think we also had individuals who were going through transplants that weren't going to be able to get it anywhere else. So.
Governor, you still looking at releasing your guidance on trick-or-treating by the end of the week?
We are still working on releasing our guidance for Halloween, and you know, part of that's everything going on at the moment. But the other part is trying to find a safe way to do it, given the CDC has said don't do trick-or-treating at all. And so we still want to give our kids an opportunity, and we're trying to figure out what that opportunity can be. You know, Halloween, I used to say my kids look forward to that 364 days a year. They're a little bit older now. I will again reiterate, though, no adult parties, no block parties. That's something that we can't do, and if you do that, we can't try to create a trick-or-treating experience, because then we brought even more people together in a close area.
The churches and civic groups do those trunk or treating in parking lots. That would be
So one option that we're looking at is to have civic groups do things outside in a way to where kids can get individually wrapped. You know, bags would be better, and if you think about it, like some people give out at birthday parties at the end, and having our civic groups step up to do that in a safe way that they have really thought through is one of the best ways we believe that there could be that experience. But again, we don't want to bring a whole bunch of people inside for it either. See, COVID makes everything not difficult, but can make everything dangerous, and it seems to attack the things that we like and love the most.
In regards to the protest last night, I know at least 2 reporters were arrested from the Daily Caller, I believe, and a number of other ones were at least saying that they were harassed by police officers even past curfew, which I believe the curfew was exempt for media. How do you respond to those issues as it relates to protests and specifically the coverage of those protests?
Yeah, the question again is about the media and any treatment last night, and I don't know of any of the specific situations, but I think one of the things you do is you address each one. You know, there are obviously a lot of heightened tensions when going through this, but when you realize that either a rule hasn't been followed or something should have been done differently, I think you've got to reach out to those that were impacted by it and talk to them, but also then reinforce the appropriate way of doing things. And you know, again, our media is here to provide coverage and to show what's going on. Now, what we saw last night was much smaller than what we saw if we go back many months. And I do hope that the media presents an accurate picture of that when it's going on. And there are those out there that might want to take something that is otherwise generally pretty peaceful and make it look different. And so I think everybody has a really important obligation to show the truth in its full context.
Yesterday we saw that protesters were pretty mobile in their march, hitting a lot of different parts of the city. And there were reports a few days ago of Indiana sending some of their National Guard down through some of the river communities on the other side of the Ohio. And with Louisville having 2 pedestrian bridges, I was just wondering if there's any sort of coordination between you and Governor Holcomb on response.
The question is coordination on response with Indiana. I know that every law enforcement group in the area is communicating, and that there is certainly on all of the ingresses and egresses to Louisville and to Indiana, planning in place for how that would operate. We did see people moving, and that's one way of people expressing themselves. Again, people need to stay on the sidewalk and not in the street. But I think that there are so many ways right now of being heard. And again, I can't and I won't tell people that I understand, because I can't ever understand the difficulty, frustration of oppression, of 400 years of slavery, segregation, Jim Crow. I'll never be able to feel that, but I can listen, and I can commit to hear people's voices who are talking about a more just world. And right now, there are more people willing to listen, and there is more coverage, more cameras than ever before. And I think people have an opportunity to be heard, but to be heard in a safe way, whether that is at their house of worship or in something else that's planned, and certainly before the curfew. So what I'd ask people is stay safe. Even if you're planning something that ought to remain peaceful, understand that, like we saw last night, one person can mess that up. I'd never ask someone not to express the way they feel in their First Amendment rights. And I want them to know that their governor is listening. But please, stay safe out there. We want to make sure that everybody can be heard, but again, can be heard in the safest way. And that also ensures the safety of our law enforcement that is out there trying, again, to make sure that we don't see any violence. Again, I know that there are a lot of hurting families, and there's families of 2 law enforcement officers that went through trauma last night, and at least one that is still at the hospital. Let's remember our compassion. Let's remember our kindness. And I think those are 2 lessons that we are pulling out of COVID that can help us with every other challenge we face. Unless we put out a release, we will be back on Monday at 4 p.m. There's likely to be a video and/or a release with the COVID updates each day until then. Thank y'all.